Let me tell you a tale that began when I was a foolish teenager. I freely admit that my friends and I made some terrible choices that night, and it all could have been avoided if we weren't such idiots. I was 17, it was mid-August, and my parents were out of town for a wedding, leaving me with the house all to myself. I was thrilled to have the place to myself for the weekend. My parents trusted me. I wasn't usually the type to cause trouble. Despite a few small slip-ups at school, I didn't smoke or drink, and neither did most of my friends. But this night was different. It started like any other evening, me and my friends playing on the Xbox. When one of them suggested we sneak out, the idea didn't excite me much. "What's the point?" I asked. "Just walk around outside, then what?" That's when my friend Elias chimed in, suggesting we do something truly wild. Down the street was an old house, abandoned, or so we thought. We weren't completely sure. A strange girl who used to ride our bus lived there for years, but then she just stopped appearing. After a few months, the house looked like a ghost town. The grass was wildly overgrown, and it was clear no one was looking after the place. Elias talked me into it. I agreed and asked him what the plan was. "We'll figure it out when we get there," he said. The house sat on a corner where two country roads met. It was a 2-story white house with a large garage behind it. The walk was too far, so we rode our bikes. As soon as we arrived, we hid our bikes and raced to the back door. But it was locked. The front door was locked too. Back at the rear, we tried to kick the door in, but it wouldn't budge. Then Elias found a sledgehammer sitting nearby. Plan B. He started hitting the door handle. After about 5 or 6 powerful swings, it finally cracked open. We pushed the door open and slowly stepped inside. The house was pitch black, lit only by our phone flashlights. What a mess. Everything was tossed around the floor, covered in grime. It was definitely not cleaned by any standard. As soon as we entered, we saw a door next to the one we'd come through. It led downstairs. I peered down. "Dude, this place looks like something out of a horror movie," I whispered, the hairs on my neck rising. I wasn't brave enough to explore down there yet. Not until we'd checked the rest of the house. We scavenged through the main floor, finding nothing but junk. Then we headed upstairs, checking all the rooms. "All right, man, we should probably just leave," I said. "Wait, did you hear that?" Elias whispered, his voice tight. "Hear what?" I asked. "Listen, idiot," he hissed. I froze, my heart pounding as I heard it too. "Dude, there's somebody in here," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Shut up, Devin." Elias shot back. "Seriously, man, you're going to get us caught." We stood still, listening as the noise continued. It sounded like someone was rummaging through boxes or drawers. Then, our worst fear came true. We heard footsteps moving towards the stairs. "Bro, let's go," I urged. Elias darted into one of the bedrooms and hid in the closet. But I, in a panic, started yanking at a window. It made a lot of noise, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting out. "Hey, what are you doing? Don't leave," Elias yelled. "Come on, man. We have to go," I shouted back. I scrambled out onto the windowsill and carefully dropped to the ground. I hurt my leg pretty badly, but I landed better than I expected. Elias yelled for me to wait, so I did. "Hurry up, man. We don't have much time," I hissed, then dashed behind a tree to hide. Elias then leaped out the window. He didn't land as well as I did, hurting himself even more. Luckily, he could still limp a bit. He made his way to my tree and slumped down, trying to catch his breath. "Bro, we seriously need to leave," I whispered. "Are you okay?" He just looked at me with a clear no. Suddenly, we heard people talking next door. It was the neighbors. Thank goodness. We started limping that way, remembering we were in the country where houses are far apart. We knew we couldn't ask them for help, as we'd just broken the law. Still, it was a comfort to know other people were nearby, just in case. We limped a little further from the empty house, and found a better hiding spot while Elias rested his ankle. After a few minutes, we heard loud noises and yelling coming from the house we'd just broken into. It sounded like 4 or 5 people were inside. Then, without warning, bam, about 10 to 15 shots rang out, like an AR-15 or something equally terrifying. I completely freaked out. We ran as fast as we could. Despite Elias's bad ankle, the walk home was incredibly long. A 3.5-mile detour. I had to carry my barely moving friend for most of the way. It took us a couple of hours to get home, and we heard more gunshots from those crazy people. I don't want to imagine what would have happened if we'd run into them. I don't know if they were squatters, the owners, or what. But a few months later, we heard on the news that someone had been shot in that very house. They never caught the killers. Ever since, I can't help but wonder what really went down. We never got a good look at the people, but I know they knew we were there. We tried to go back for our bikes a few nights later, but they were gone. They must have taken them. It's chilling to think someone was murdered in that house while we were inside. It easily could have been us. If they'd found us, I'm sure they would have killed us, to silence any witnesses. I was 23, on vacation with my family in Africa, and we spent 2 nights at a desert camp in the Sahara. The first night, my sister and I chatted with the camp staff, mostly guys aged 20 to 35. They seemed friendly enough, harmless even. But around the campfire that night, I noticed one man watching me more closely, which made me a little uneasy. I tried to brush it off, thinking it might just be a language barrier. In the desert, the stars are incredible. You can even see the Milky Way on clear nights. But you have to wait until the moon sets, usually around 2 a.m. The camp tents were luxurious, with beds, lights, a toilet and a shower, and they locked from the inside. It was apparently common for the staff to knock on doors after the moon went down, inviting guests to see the stars. My sister and I shared a tent, while my parents were in another across the path. Around midnight the first night, I told my sister I was too tired to go out. I was already half asleep, so she left to see the stars without me. I didn't lock the door, worried she might get locked out if I drifted off completely. About an hour later, I woke suddenly, still half asleep, to a head peeking through the tent door. I thought it was my sister and groggily asked, "What the heck are you doing?" Her way of standing there was just weird. As I woke more fully, I realized it wasn't her. It was that man from the campfire, his head inside my tent, watching me sleep. It might have been a simple misunderstanding, but I felt completely violated. We were deep in their territory, in the middle of the desert, a 30-minute truck ride just to get to the dunes. I was instantly in fight or flight mode, waking up with a full-blown panic attack. My heart raced, and I felt incredibly nervous and on edge. I went to the door and told him I was tired. He kept trying to get me to come out to the dunes with a blanket, but I just kept saying no, that I didn't feel well and was tired, which was true. I was disoriented, unsure where my sister or family were. All I knew was this man was standing in front of me, having watched me sleep. I don't know how long he was there, a second or 2 minutes, but I was utterly horrified. I told him no again, saying I'd look at the stars tomorrow night. He replied that he wouldn't be at the camp the next night, which was why he wanted to go tonight. I wouldn't budge. When he realized I wouldn't come out, he asked for my number. I told him no. I had a boyfriend. I don't actually have one, but it seemed like the only way he would respect my refusal was if another man was in the picture. After that, he asked for my first name, which I gave him, thinking it couldn't hurt. Then I said goodnight, and locked the door tightly. I immediately went to the bathroom, utterly terrified. While I was in there, I heard him come back, calling my name softly from outside the tent. I stayed quiet, not making a sound. I finished in the bathroom, and lay back down, heart still racing, trying to calm myself. I heard him return again, calling my name. I stayed as still as I could,
Silent. I tried texting my dad, but he didn't answer. I didn't feel safe leaving the tent. Finally, my sister came back, and my dad was with her. I told them what happened. They seemed confused, thought it was weird, and that was that. The next day at breakfast, I brought it up again, but my sister and dad basically told me I was being dramatic and should stop talking about it. They said it wasn't a big deal. My mom was the only one who agreed it was strange. The second night, my sister and I were both out under the stars, chatting with the staff. It was incredibly dark. You couldn't see faces clearly. I was having a normal conversation with one guy, when he suddenly asked if I remembered him. No, I can't even see you, I replied. Shine a light then, he said. So I did. And wouldn't you know it, it was the same man from my tent door the night before. I was shocked, especially since he'd told me he wouldn't be there. This made me think he might have specifically picked up a shift to see me. Or perhaps he lied to pressure me into going out with him that first night. Surprisingly, he was fine that evening and respected my boundaries, so I didn't report him to the camp managers, though I was ready to if he made me uncomfortable again. The next morning, we left the desert. A few days later, I started getting Instagram message requests. Believe it or not, this guy found me. I'd tagged the entire desert in my photos, not a specific location, and my name isn't unique. Still, he found me, even though I was creeped out. I also thought, well, maybe he's harmless now. I decided to see what he would say. His first message was a direct quote. You know, I'm really happy to find your account. I was looking for a long time. I found this incredibly creepy. But again, maybe it was a cultural difference. I didn't reply. A few days later, he messaged again. Hey, how are you? I still didn't respond. So, I wonder what you all think. Was I overreacting? Or was my gut feeling right? In the end, he seemed harmless. But you never truly know. This whole unsettling situation began when I was a teenager. I'm a woman in my late 20s now. It started with a brief conversation I completely forgot about until 2 years ago. But over the last 2 years, more things happened that made me rethink that short talk. I was about 13 when my mom and I moved back in with my grandma. My uncle already lived there, and so did his friend, who was only staying for a few months for reasons I never knew. One day, when the friend was out, my uncle pulled me aside. He looked serious, and told me he didn't want me to be alone with his friend. He said I needed to call him immediately if I ever found myself by myself with this man. Just about a week after we moved in, my uncle kicked his friend out. I was young, so I didn't really think much of that conversation, and completely forgot it ever happened. Then, about 2 years ago, my uncle suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. After his death, his friend re-entered my grandma's life. I think my grandma Connie saw him as a replacement for my uncle. At first, everything seemed okay. But after a few visits, I started feeling uneasy around him, though I didn't know why. That's when my uncle's old warning popped back into my head. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was over 10 years ago, and he was now married to a lovely woman. Surely things had changed. He made many jokes that I never found funny, but they seemed harmless enough. For example, I'd sometimes come home with a bowl of snacks my coworkers and I shared, and he'd ask where his portion was. Small stuff like that. But then he'd sometimes make comments about my clothes that made me feel uncomfortable. I used to brush it off, because my family made similar jokes. Like, oh, who are you trying to impress, dressed like that? Or you must be fighting off men left and right. At that point, I started avoiding my room when he was over. But sometimes interactions were unavoidable. He'd be there when I got home from work, or he'd just show up without warning. A little more background. I'm engaged to a man who lives in another country. I've visited him many times, and have absolutely fallen in love with his home. It's also more affordable and safer for us there, so we're planning my move to be with him. I never told my uncle's friend about this, because he made me uneasy. But I knew my grandma told him everything, so he knew all about my plans. He'd often ask me why I was moved. I'd explain it was for my fiancé, and because I loved his home. My uncle's friend would always respond with, "Oh, of course, it's for a boy," and other remarks like, I guess you're in love. I just don't understand it. But whatever, he acted bothered by my engagement and my mood. Again, I would just retreat to my room, constantly telling myself I was overthinking it and overreacting. I also knew I couldn't say anything to my grandma. My family has always been of the mindset that if you don't want comments, you should cover yourself up. I wasn't even allowed to wear shorts around male family members, because if they had bad thoughts it would be my fault. All these small instances made me deeply uncomfortable, but I just ignored them, hid in my room, and did my best to avoid him. But then, something happened today that left me with a truly sickening feeling. I went to work, and my coworker told me that yesterday, a man who perfectly matched my uncle's friend's description came into my workplace in the afternoon after I had already left. He was asking about me, wanting details like where I lived and specifics about my move abroad. He even mentioned being my uncle's friend. I hadn't been there to hear any of this, but my coworker is completely trustworthy. She wouldn't make something like this up, and is usually the first to call out lies. I trust her. He told her that since my uncle passed, he'd been trying to see me more because he cared about me and saw me as his daughter. That comment alone deeply disturbed me. I barely interacted with this man, and actively avoided him. So why did he feel such a close connection? He also spoke at length about my move to another country, refusing to drop the topic. He kept saying he didn't understand how I could fall in love with someone so far away, and that I should just stay here and find someone local. He made other comments that showed he clearly disapproved of my move to be with my fiancée. This man is oddly obsessed with me. I never told him where I worked, but my grandma probably did. Still, it's chilling that he came to my workplace, looking for me, and then talked to my coworkers about my choices and future plans, all while barely knowing me. I truly cannot wait to get out of this house and move far away from him. This story happened when I was 12 years old. That was more than half my life ago, but I still feel very uneasy thinking back to it. I've tried to block it from my mind, not wanting to imagine what could have happened if two kind strangers hadn't helped me. One day, I was walking home from school. It was a 4-kilometer trek along a busy road, and I was alone. At one of the intersections, I noticed a tall, dirty-looking man staring at me. He looked to be in his early 30s, but as a kid I struggled to guess adult ages. He started following me, trying to strike up a conversation. He kept telling me I was beautiful, and that he wanted us to be friends. He asked where I lived, and if my parents were home, plus many other questions. I tried to shake him off, remaining polite, but not engaging. I didn't answer any of his questions, just sped up my walking pace. As we neared my block, I grew incredibly uneasy. He was still following, and I desperately wanted him to leave me alone. He gave off a truly weird vibe. Adults didn't usually speak to me like that. The only way I could think to get rid of him was to give him my cell phone number and promise to answer his calls. Because of how uncomfortable I was, I gave him a fake number, then sprinted away. A few months passed without me seeing him again, so I pushed the whole incident out of my mind, assuming he was just some weirdo. But as you can probably guess, things didn't stay that way. Approximately 4 months later, I was walking home from school again, admittedly not paying much attention to my surroundings. That changed when I heard footsteps rapidly approaching behind me. My reflexes kicked in, and I quickly spun around. It was him. That same creepy man. He slowed his pace as he reached me, but he was yelling the whole time. He had figured out I gave him the wrong number and was furious. He kept screaming that I thought I was better than him, and that's why I gave him a fake number. I was absolutely terrified. He was genuinely angry, and I feared he would hurt me. I tried to catch the attention of passing cars, but no one seemed to notice. I power walked towards the closest petrol station, which thankfully wasn't too far, with him still yelling behind me the entire way. When I reached the station, I immediately caught the eye of 2 burly men standing next to their pickup truck. They must have seen the pure terror on my face, plus the man following me, because they instantly rushed over, asking if I was alright. I was too scared to speak, just frantically shaking my head as I tried to get behind them. They immediately demanded to know why the man was following me. He fed them some nonsense, trying to lie and say he was my brother. I just kept silently shaking my head. I guess they realized what was happening because they started yelling at him, accusing him of being a child predator. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I took the chance while he was distracted and started to run. The man noticed I was leaving and tried to chase after me, but the two men took serious offense to this. They immediately tackled him and threw him into the back of their pickup. He was screaming at this point. I ran off with incredible speed, past them, and just kept going. I was relieved they took him away, but I didn't stop running until I reached home. I had no idea what to make of the entire exchange, but it truly shook me. I honestly didn't want to know where they took that creepy guy or what they did to him. I told my parents and I changed my route home from school. I never saw him again, and for that, I am incredibly thankful. Even though I couldn't speak in that moment, those two kind strangers saw my distress and handled it for me. Even after all these years, I still remember the sheer terror and then the overwhelming relief when they took him away. Let me tell you about my brief encounter with a man I called Happy. I'm sure it wasn't his real name, but it adds to the eerie feeling of the story. Even though this happened about 9 years ago, he still crosses my mind sometimes, especially on gloomy overcast days in Los Angeles. Just like the day I met him in 2013, I was working at a cannabis shop in Venice Beach, just a block from the boardwalk. About 35% of our customers were unhoused individuals. Sometimes, someone experiencing severe mental health issues would try to come in, but if they were screaming or impossible to understand, security wouldn't let them pass. If they had their medical papers, ID and cash, the Holy Trinity, they were good to go. We had a compassion program, bagging up leftover bits of cannabis for free, 1 person per day to anyone who asked. Word of this spread quickly along the boardwalk. Generally, these customers were the kindest, most polite, and most thoughtful people, even if they smelled a bit strong or pulled their money from a sweaty sock. No one working there ever batted an eye if someone smelled like they'd spent a week sleeping on the beach next to a vodka bottle, as long as they bought their weed and moved on like any other customer. It was a foggy, chilly day around the holidays, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone had called out of work, so I was the only person behind the counter. There was another employee at the front desk, and a security guard at the door, but I was alone in the main sales room. There were cameras, but no one was actively watching them. A man walked in after being checked at the front. He was the only customer at the moment, and I swear the whole room felt colder as he entered. He wore a deeply faded, wrinkled floor-length leather duster jacket, like a cowboy. It looked like he had lived and slept in those same clothes for years. We usually didn't allow hats, hoods or sunglasses inside, so I was surprised security hadn't made him take his hat off. This man was huge, about 6'5", and built like a boulder. Not fat, just massively large, the kind that could pick you up and toss you like a rag doll. The stench that came with him was unlike anything I had ever smelled before. It was beyond body odor, beyond urine. It smelled like actual death, as if he had raw, rotting carcasses tucked beneath his thick, long leather coat. I thought I was hardened by plenty of nasty smells working there, but this was absolutely revolting, far beyond someone who hadn't showered lately or peed their pants. Trying not to breathe too deeply, I said with a big customer service smile, "Hi sir. Excuse me. Would you mind taking off your hat? Just store policy. What are you looking for today?" He groaned deeply, walking very slowly, shuffling and dragging his feet. His voice was like gravel, rough, wet, raw and angry. "I don't take off my hat," he grumbled. At this point, I wasn't going to argue. Just get him in and out. I glanced down and saw he wasn't wearing shoes. From what I could see under his coat, one of his ankles was massively swollen purple-black, like the size of a melon. The bottoms of both his feet were bloody and torn up. I realized he was leaving a faint trail of blood as he dragged his tattered feet across the concrete floor. My first thought was, why and how did security even let this guy in? Second, this guy is clearly injured. As a human being, it was concerning. I made sure to keep the display shelf between us, though it was only about a foot of space. Like a bar, he edged closer, and the stench grew stronger. Meekly, but sincerely, I asked, "Are you all right, sir?" His eyes flared at me. "What do you care?" he snapped. In my head I thought, well, I tried. Not my life. Not my problem. Not my monkeys. Not my circus. "Great," I said, forcing a smile. "So what can I get for you?" He then pulled up one of his sleeves exposing his forearm. It was covered in a shocking number of burns, like from cigars. Some old, some healed, some fresh and infected. These weren't track marks. They were clearly third-degree burn. He also had a jagged, homemade-looking stick-and-poke tattoo of a smiley face, a crooked circle, 2 lines for eyes, and a crude early smile. He pointed at the tattoo. Happy, my name is Happy. The rotting smell was so powerful. I had to take shallow, small breaths. The least amount possible. I walked here, he added. I walked all the way from Pasadena. Wow, sir. That's a very long walk. I managed. Anyway, what are you looking for today? Just for you, he said. His eyes dark and menacing. He was smeared with a layer of grime, as if he lived in the woods. He didn't look like the typical down-and-out punk or disabled veteran you might see on the beach. It was hard to guess his age. Somewhere between 30. He looked like he'd crawled out of a log cabin, like a disturbing mix of someone from a horror movie and an 1800s homesteader, somehow transported to Venice Beach in 2030. I had never seen this man before, but once was enough to make him unforgettable.
He kept staring at me, and I pressed myself as far back against the wall as I could, hoping to stay out of his reach if he lunged. If I needed to get to the security guard, I'd have to walk out from behind the counter and around him. Weighing my options, I quickly grabbed a bunch of the free compassion grams, and then weighed out an eighth, marking it down to pay for later. He was still just glaring at me, wheezing heavy breaths. We actually have a special today, I said, trying to sound cheerful, only for people who walked more than 10 miles to get here. This is all for you, on the house. Thank you for stopping by. He accepted the bag but continued to stand there, just staring at me. Thank you, Happy, I said. It worked. He grunted a guttural, non-word noise, then slowly turned and shuffled back towards the door. At the door, he turned back to me and said, I'll see you later. Finally, he walked out, leaving behind a powerful, lingering stench of death. I thanked every god I knew that I did not see Happy later, or ever again. When I asked security why they possibly let him in, he explained that he'd noticed the bloody feet and asked, Hey bro, are you alright? That looks like it hurts. Apparently Happy stepped right into his face, threatened to choke him out, and used a terrible racial slur. Since it was just him and 2 young women, he decided it wasn't worth dying over, and hoped Happy would just get his stuff and leave. He had been watching the cameras in the back, ready to call the police and owners if anything got weird. We clearly had different definitions of weird, but I understood his reaction. Ultimately, we were all okay, just shaken and creeped out. But now, we were left with the task of cleaning blood off the floor with bleach and gloves, and then texting our boss that he owed us free weed. He actually agreed, and we all lived happily ever after. About 10 years ago, a few friends and I embarked on a short camping and fishing trip to a really remote lake, a few hours from our small town. We were all packed and excited. The drive was pretty quiet until we got closer to our destination, and then a wave of excited energy hit us. Once we arrived, we quickly set up camp. Nothing too fancy, just 2 tents for the 4 of us, and our backpacks with supplies for the weekend. After settling in, we grabbed our fishing gear, a ton of beer, and headed to the lake to try our luck. It was probably around 3 p.m. We were all having a blast. Some of us might have been a bit tipsy, but that was part of the fun, just guys being guys. After several hours, we were ready to call it a day for fishing. It was around 8 p.m., and dusk was settling in, so we started back to camp. We were quite a distance from camp, having lost track of how far we'd ventured, but it wasn't a big deal. The sunset was beautiful, and we were approaching camp just as night fell. As Jimmy and Tom were getting out of their boat, we spotted some flashing lights ahead through the woods, past our camp. They vanished after a few seconds, so we figured they were just passers-by. The thought quickly left our minds. Holy crap, guys, look, Tom suddenly hissed. We all looked where he was pointing. There,
No more than 50 feet from John and Timmy was a bear. "Just stay calm, dude. He'll leave us alone," someone whispered. We all quietly walked back to camp, moving slowly so as not to spook the bear into thinking we were prey. Luckily, we all made it safely back to camp. Just as we thought our problems were over, we heard a car in the distance, getting closer. Then headlights appeared. Moments later, a blacked-out SUV rolled right up to our campsite. A gulp of fear caught in my throat. I'd heard horror stories of people being attacked in the woods, out of nowhere, and my mind instantly jumped to fight or flight. A slight panic welled up inside me as two men stepped out of the vehicle. Both were over 6 feet tall and built like tanks. They introduced themselves as sheriffs and asked what we were doing there. Tom said we were camping. That's when I blurted out, "Leave us alone." I had a bad feeling about this whole situation. We could barely see them in the dark as they shone their flashlights at us. They said they'd seen us fishing and demanded to see our fishing licenses. We all had them, so that wasn't an issue. However, I hesitated to hand mine over. I started to wonder if they were even real cops. Plus, we hadn't done anything for them to suspect us of a crime, and I made sure to tell them I knew my rights as a citizen. One of them demanded my ID and threatened to arrest me if I didn't give it to him. I wasn't going to let him scare me. My dad is a cop, and I know it's not normal for them to abuse their power like this. My father had always taught me what to do in such situations. I told them my father was the chief of police for the county and asked them which county they worked for. Of course they didn't answer. Yes, I lied a little, hoping to give our group some street cred. My dad wasn't the chief of this county, but the next one over. After I said that, we could all tell they started to get flustered. They quickly changed their tone, acting like there was no issue anymore. "Sorry for bothering you guys," one of them mumbled. Then they turned and got back in their car. As they walked back to the SUV, we noticed they weren't wearing traditional police uniforms. They were just in normal flannel shirts and sweatpants. Maybe we should have chased them down or called the police, but we never did. We were all certain they were fake cops. When I got home, I told my dad about it, but he never alerted the station, because none of us could give enough details about the men. I can't help but wonder what their plans were. Were they real cops on a power trip? Or if not, were they going to search us, take our weapons and then attack and rob us? Who knows? But I'm incredibly glad nothing worse came of that situation. I've held back from sharing this story for a long time. I understand how crucial the trust between a tenant and their landlord or maintenance staff is, and I don't want to needlessly make anyone distrustful. I've told tales before about dangerous residents I've met while working at apartment complexes, but this is about my experience from the other side. As a renter, before I even finished high school, I knew I wanted to live at Paradise Apartment. I was a bit naive back then, drawn in by all the fancy things I'd never use. Mostly I wanted to live there, because it was pet-friendly and fit my small budget. When it was finally time for me to get my own place, I took the only apartment they had available and moved in. Sadly, I soon realized the apartment wasn't as great as I'd imagined. The building was old, even though it had been redone, so it had all the usual leaky pipes and thin walls. I also learned it wasn't the safest part of town. I was mostly an online student, with just one class that met in person twice a week. At 8 a.m., I was quite a homebody, rarely leaving during the day, except for that class, an occasional shopping trip or to spend time with my boyfriend in the evenings after his work. My apartment felt like a Bermuda Triangle, even though it was only 600 square feet, and I lived alone. Things had a way of disappearing. I had 2 kittens at the time, and I often blamed them for things going missing. However, one strange thing kept happening. I'd find my underwear box sitting out in the middle of my bedroom floor on days when I had class. I didn't have a proper dresser. Instead, I used an IKEA shelf with IKEA boxes for different clothes, like socks, underwear, pants, and pajamas. I always swore I put the underwear box away right after getting ready for class, but I just chalked it up to forgetting, being focused on getting to class on time. I started to feel paranoid, thinking some of my laundry was disappearing too. My favorite clothes would go into the hamper, and never seemed to come back with the clean ones. Towards the end of that semester, I was working on a homework assignment one evening, when my boyfriend called. His roommate had accidentally locked him out of their apartment. I had a key to their place, so he asked if I could quickly run over to let him in. Before I left, I made a mental note that I had left every single light in my apartment. I was on a tight budget, and usually made sure to turn off all the lights. But my boyfriend lived only about 5 minutes away, so I knew I'd be back quickly. Sure enough, I returned less than 15 minutes later. I immediately sensed something was off. I could see through the blinds that all the lights were off. I called my boyfriend, and he drove over to meet me. We unlocked the door and went in. All the lights were indeed off. Thinking it might be a power outage, I flipped on the main light, and it came right. My boyfriend checked the entire apartment, but no one was inside. Yet someone had systematically turned off every single light switch, including my lizard's basking light. The only light I always left on because it was on a timer. My laptop, which I'd left open on my assignment, had been powered down and closed. I called the emergency maintenance number, and explained that someone had been inside my apartment and must have used a key, as there were no signs of forced entry. The manager called me back, telling me I must be imagining things. Maybe I'd forgotten I turned off the lights. I assured him I would never have turned off the computer or the lizard light. Someone had been in my apartment. I told him I was really worried because this person obviously had a key. Either they worked for the complex, or they were a previous tenant. I asked if they had changed the locks after the last tenant moved out, and they swore they changed locks after every move out. The manager suggested it might be a friend playing a prank, or someone else I'd given a key to. The only other people I'd given keys to were my boyfriend and my mom, but my mom lived 3 hours away, and neither of them would ever prank me like that. The manager finally agreed to send someone out immediately to change the lock for my peace of mind. I brought up my concern that it was someone on the staff, since they would be the only other people with keys. The manager claimed the keys were locked in a special safe that required a personalized code to track who took what keys, when and where, and that the safe was in an office with a security camera. They changed my locks, but I had my doubts it would do much good. As far as I knew, there were only 2 maintenance men working at the complex. One nice older man, who didn't seem very skilled, and a younger guy with a scruffy beard, who gave me a bad feeling. I suspected he had to be the one breaking it. When I first moved in, the manager had told me I'd get a new kitchen counter within 3 days. I waited to unpack my kitchen stuff, but after a week, no one came, and after a few months, I completely forgot about it. One day, I was sitting in my living room, when this scruffy maintenance guy walked right in, without knocking or announcing himself. I hadn't received any notice he was coming. He said he was there to replace my countertop, but it took him 2 days to install one small piece of counter. A few weeks later, I was stepping out of the shower, and heard a single knock at the door. I called out, "Just 1 minute," to get some clothes. Not even 2 seconds later, the door started to open. I had to slam it shut, still wrapped in a towel to stop him from coming in. He claimed he hadn't heard me call out, but I had my doubts. I don't even remember his excuse for coming in another time. Then, I found a note from him. He had come in again, and it didn't give a reason why, only that he made sure not to let my cats out. He also made a note about my third cat being cute, except I didn't have a third cat. I did, however, have a picture of my childhood cat in my bedroom, on that IKEA shelf, where I kept my clothes. At that point, I went to the office, and demanded they put a note in my file that I wanted at least 24 hours notice before entry, and that I wanted to always be present for any future entry. Now that I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that someone was secretly coming in, it all made sense. Not long after those surprise maintenance visits started, things had begun moving around in my apartment. He was also on site all the time. Everyone on staff lived at Paradise, so he knew when I came and went. How many times had he snuck in? How many small souvenirs had he stolen? He could have even been coming in while I was asleep. Even after the night with the lights, I put my own lock on the door, but I still didn't completely trust the apartment. I ended up buying a condo shortly after, with help from my parents. I subleased the apartment, and moved out around that time. I also got my first job working in a different apartment complex. In the final days before I left, my mom came into town to help me move my stuff. While she was home alone, I was at class. She caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to get his key to work in my lock. She demanded to know what he was doing. He said he was there to paint the front door, but I hadn't received a notice, and he didn't have any paint or supplies. My mom told him he could wait until after I moved out. A few years later, I had a shopper visit me at the new complex where I worked, called OK Apartments. A shopper is when an employee from another apartment complex pretends to be a potential renter to gather information that wouldn't normally be shared easily. Sometimes management companies do it to check on their own staff. Shoppers usually had certain giveaways asking very specific questions like, "Is it safe here?" or "I'm a felon. Can I live here?" Questions that needed precise answers and could easily trip someone up. They might also be too wealthy for the complex. Rolex watch, sports car, nice suit, or too flexible about what they were interested in, saying they liked all layouts and were open to moving in anytime. This guy seemed too old and too well off to be genuinely looking for an apartment at OK, which was geared towards lower income residents. While I was giving him the tour, he asked if I had any opinions on other apartment complexes in town, and specifically mentioned Paradise. Normally I wouldn't badmouth other places. I prefer to win people over by showing the good points of our community. But I told him I probably wasn't the best person to ask, because I was likely the only person who would give Paradise a bad review in the last 5 years. He asked me to explain. I told him my apartment had been broken into, and I suspected it was someone on their maintenance staff. At that point, he revealed he was the owner of Paradise. He was very disturbed to hear about my experience. He asked me to describe the maintenance man in detail. I assured him it was in the past and I was over it, but he insisted on calling the manager at Paradise, still the same guy, and putting him on speakerphone. He asked if they had any issues with maintenance staff back in the year I lived there. The manager answered yes. There had been a scruffy young maintenance man he had to fire, because he'd been caught multiple times breaking into the apartments of single women.
Relieved, the owner told me the issue had been resolved and asked if I'd be willing to change my review. I told him no, but none of this changed what I had experienced, but I was glad he could actually confirm what I had suspected. In my years working as a leasing agent, I learned a lot about how complexes cut corners to save time and money. Many didn't change locks if a tenant was good, and many didn't require background checks for employees, even though they did for tenants. Keys were also handed out carelessly to vendors in maintenance during apartment turnovers, and employees frequently got master keys that opened all doors. I won't say every complex operates this way, but every complex I worked at was doing this when I started. Because of my own experiences, once I started managing a complex, I enforced strict rules about changing locks, tracking keys, posting proper notices, and requiring background checks for all employees and tenants. At least here in Florida, with NIA's law taking effect this year, background checks for employees and security measures for keys are now required for all complexes. Even so, if you're renting an apartment, stay watchful. If you have any reason to believe someone is entering your home, document it and tell the staff, police, or your friends and family. You never know who might have a key to your apartment. Back in 2008, I was on the hunt for a new truck. I visited a few dealerships, but only a couple of vehicles really caught my eye. I wasn't in a hurry. The most important thing was finding a truck I'd truly be happy with. Then I spotted a 2005 F50 on Craigslist, at a decent price, with low miles. The only issue was the tires needed replacing, which was a bit of a pain, but I was still interested. I figured I could negotiate a lower price for the inconvenience. The seller gave me an address, and when I arrived, I was met by a nice older gentleman, probably in his late 50s or early 60s. He seemed normal, very direct, and didn't say much. I asked for a small discount because of the tires. He seemed hesitant at first, but we reached an agreement. My fiancée had come with me to look at the truck, so she could drive our other car home if I bought it, and I'd drive the new one. That's exactly what happened. After a quick test drive, I decided to buy it. I handed him the cash, and we were on our way, thrilled about my new truck and the great deal. We headed home and enjoyed the rest of our day. It wasn't until later that night, when I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, that I saw it, a shadow shaped like a man, standing in my driveway. We live in the country, and our driveway is long. It was pitch black, and all I could make out was this dark shape. I wasn't even sure if it was a man or a woman, but from the build I assumed it was a man. I called out asking who was there, but he didn't answer. I threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. After that, he started walking towards me. I bolted inside, shouting at my wife to call the police and tell them there was an unknown man in our driveway. I ran into our room, grabbed my rifle, and went back outside, hoping to scare him off, but he was gone. I chuckled to myself, thinking I'd successfully scared him away. I was completely wrong. In an instant, I heard my wife screaming for my help inside. I ran as fast as I could, and saw the man had pinned her to the ground. I rushed over and hit him with the butt of my rifle, knocking him out cold. Apparently we had left the garage door unlocked, and that's how he'd gotten into our house. I quickly zip-tied his wrists behind his back in case he woke up and tried to escape. We waited for the police to arrive. At one point I wasn't even sure if he was alive, so I checked his pulse. His heart was still beating, and I was honestly relieved I hadn't killed him. The police showed up and arrested the man, but not before taking him to the hospital. My wife and I were taken in for questioning. Ever since that night, I've been incredibly jumpy and paranoid. I honestly think I developed some kind of PTSD from it. I later learned that he had placed a GPS tracker under our truck before selling it to us, and that's how he found us. Why? I'm still not sure. The whole thing is incredibly bizarre. My wife and I still think about it from time to time. We have no clue what he had against us or why he would do such a thing. The police never got a good answer from him either as to his motives. It's clear there was something mentally wrong with him. But what drives a man to such random violence? He's lucky he walked out of my house alive after attacking my wife like that. Just saying. For a bit of background, I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never violent or overtly threatening. So stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. To be honest, after a while I wasn't even scared anymore, since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can deeply affect people, even in cases like mine, and that's completely valid. But I guess I got lucky, and it never truly affected me mentally. His stalking mostly involved sending me letters and gifts, like photos of my apartment building from the outside, or things he'd dug out of my trash. I called the police many times, but they couldn't catch or identify him. Since I barely use social media outside of Reddit, and have no identifying info here, I didn't think he'd ever see my posts. Someone even asked, "Does he know you're airing him out on Reddit?" I replied, Maybe it would make him angry, or maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care." Well, now I know the real answer. He did see it, and he definitely didn't like it. As I said, he was never usually aggressive, and never came close. The closest I knew of was when he sent a picture of me alone, unlocking my apartment door. I consider myself pretty alert, so I thought he might have hidden a camera there instead of being there himself. I believe I would have noticed him if he was physically present, but I can't be sure. I don't know how he found out about my Reddit post, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then, he left me letters with printed out questions, and my answers from the post. He also left a long, hateful letter directed at my boyfriend, about an issue I'd posted about on the German version of a popular advice forum. His letters had never been hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy about my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him, since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I received a gift, but this time, he didn't leave it in my mailbox or on my car, like he usually did. No, this time, he left it inside the apartment building, right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment. I opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm writing this,
I realize it wasn't a good idea at all to open it, and it could have ended badly. Luckily, he didn't send a bomb or anything. However, he did send several zip ties, a roll of painter's tape, nothing you could use to tie someone up, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones. According to the police, they just looked used, not actually, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me, but he had been cut out of the frame. The frame was shattered, and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen from the frame. They were intentionally placed among the crumpled newspaper used as padding. I called the police right away and gave them the box. They were much more concerned this time. Finally, they told me they'd send patrol cars more frequent. He didn't show up or leave any letters or gifts for about another week and a half, but 8 days ago, it started again. I found letters in my mailbox, where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I hadn't been appreciating his effort, and how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning, and heard a crunch as I stepped on my doormat. He had placed broken glass under it. I was rushing off to work, and was just going to have my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The side mirrors were scratched, a light was smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. "It's time soon, miss my first and last name." I went back inside and called the police myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time, they really took me seriously, probably because I was visibly furious, and I made that very clear. If for some reason you're like me and too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, all the letters, gifts, photos, even the glass under my doormat, were just annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless now, and that direct threat scared me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence, even though the quality wasn't high, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before. But they said it wasn't enough. They told me they'd investigate further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days, until 2 days ago someone rang the doorbell just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, both hesitant. I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got to the door, I heard shouting, "This is the police." Opened the door. They told us they'd been called by one of our downstairs neighbors. He'd come home from his night shift about an hour earlier, and heard someone else enter the building right after him, before his door was fully shut. My neighbors knew about my situation, and I'd asked them not to let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his apartment and looked through his peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor, it was just me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids, who likely wasn't getting visitors at 3 a.m. They went up and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have seen the cop car through the small window up there. They had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He was finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a controversial Reddit post, and one very watchful and caring neighbor. But he's finally done for now. At least, he's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now, I finally have some peace. I'm a 32-year-old woman, and this happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I worked full-time as a researcher at a university, and that's where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor, and at my age back then, I could easily have been mistaken for just another student walking around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I preferred to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds, or sitting under a shady tree on a bench, instead of being cooped up in a cramped lab corner. On one of these days, as I sat enjoying the fresh air, a male student walked by and asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward person, so even though I really would have preferred to sit alone, I said shh. He started a simple conversation, and I politely obliged, being careful not to share too much. He mentioned he had seen which apartment building I came and went from, which was slightly alarming since I'd never seen him before, but I brushed the thought aside. After all, the weather had been nice, and I'd spent almost every lunch hour outside that week. He asked if I was studying in that department, and I told him I wasn't a student, but rather I worked there. He said he was an engineering student, and then he asked me out for coffee sometime. I apologized and told him I had a boyfriend and had to decline. He left after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two later, I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench, seemingly out of nowhere. The same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. I don't remember why he started talking to me first, but my mind was spinning. I was uncomfortable, knowing I might have to turn him down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me out for coffee again. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and wouldn't be meeting him. And again, I was feeling quite anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt truly threatened. A few days later, I finished work and was leaving the building to walk to my car. The university charged a fortune for parking passes, even for employees, so I always chose free street parking about a 10-minute walk away. My route took me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car or even pedestrian traffic. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I saw him in my side vision, and didn't want to turn around and stare. It wasn't uncommon to see other people, but I always tried to be aware of my surroundings when walking alone. I had a few turns coming up anyway, and the chance that he would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made every turn I did, still on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still didn't want to look at him directly. I didn't want him to know I was aware of what I suspected he was doing. I quickened my pace to a very fast walk. I was approaching the first of two busier streets before reaching my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked. The moment I was sure he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog to cross the first busy street. He ran to keep up behind me, and was now on the same side of the street as I was. I was almost at my car now. I had to cross the last busy street and go about 100 meters, and then I'd be there. But crossing that street worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before traffic cleared. If that happened, he would catch up, but it was as if the stars aligned. As soon as I reached the busy street, there was a gap in traffic. I sprinted across, as fast as I could. Finally, once I was safely on the other side, I turned around to look and yell at the man who had been chasing me. It was him. I had suspected, but now it was confirmed. The engineering student I had turned down for coffee. Stop following me. I yelled across the busy street. Can I just talk to you? He yelled back. I didn't even answer him. The answer should have been obvious by then. I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and chased me for about a kilometer. I kept moving quickly to my car, so determined to get out of there, that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. To my relief, he had given up following me, and never tried to cross the road. I got home, and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I wasn't physically harmed, thankfully, but I was deeply shaken. I had intense anxiety walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I started walking most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I parked for a while. A few weeks passed since the incident, and I hadn't seen him around campus at all. I started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally, I would go to the student center to buy lunch. On one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall when I heard a guy trying to get someone's attention through the crowd. I looked up, and it was him again, waving at me, trying to push through the people. I panicked. Even though I'm terribly shy, I created a scene. I yelled at him to leave me alone. His face instantly dropped as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, I was even more focused on my surroundings than ever before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then, and I still work at the university. I'm so relieved to say I never saw him again after that food court incident, and I haven't had any other frightening encounters on campus. I am now incredibly careful about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked this guy's name, so I couldn't even report the incidents to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me.